So we're going to move on to the next two ratios, sine and cosine. Before you start this, make sure you understand tangent ratio, tan inverse, and you've done a review before moving on. We're going to learn the sine and cosine ratios. So before we move to the next section, I want to recap the tangent ratio. The first triangle, we have an angle, we have a side measured, we use the tangent formula to calculate the third side. Second one, we've got two sides. This time we use the tan inverse to actually solve the missing angle. We always measure two things, calculate a third. Pause the video, see why we can't use it for this one. What's different about this triangle? So pause it right now, take a look. What you'll find is we don't have the right sides. If we label the sides, we're given a number, we're given the hypotenuse. Tangent ratio can't use the hypotenuse. So the question is, how do we solve this one using trigonometry? To solve a triangle where we need to find the hypotenuse, or we're given the hypotenuse and asked to find the angle, we have to use one of two. There's two options we have. The sine ratio is comparing the opposite to the hypotenuse, and it has to be in that order. Opposite divided by hypotenuse. The cosine ratio is if we have the adjacent. Now, if we have the adjacent, we divide it by the hypotenuse. So both are the same thing. On your calculator, it's three letters, SIN or COS. So look for that. That's sine and cosine. And now to put them all together, a way to remember all the formulas is SOHCAHTOA. Remember this. All your formulas are here. Sine formula, sine is O divided by H, or opposite divided by hypotenuse. Cosine, it's always the A divided by H, adjacent divided by hypotenuse, and we already know tan ratio. So our first question to look at is this triangle here. We have a 53-degree triangle. This side is 45 centimeters, and we're asked to find K. So remember the steps. Step one, label the sides. Then we have to pick a formula. So if you look at it carefully, we have the adjacent and we need the hypotenuse. I've put a little cheat sheet with all our formulas. We need a ratio that has adjacent and hypotenuse. If you look through, sine has hypotenuse, cosine has adjacent and hypotenuse. This is the chosen ratio. So we start with the formula. Cosine is adjacent divided by hypotenuse. We take our two numbers. We've got 53 degrees, 45 centimeters. And with this one, we're going to switch this with the denominator. And just like the tan ratio, we're going to solve using algebra, but this time we're using the cosine ratio. So you use a different button on the calculator. You'll use the COS, cosine, instead of the tan ratio. So label the sides, choose the right formula, and then use algebra to solve. So take a look at our next example. We've got a triangle with two sides measured, but we're missing the angle, and it says find the angle X. So we're going to do the same thing. Label the sides, calculate. So for this triangle, we have the opposite, we have the hypotenuse. We're going to look through our three ratios. Which one has opposite and hypotenuse? Sine is the only one. Cosine has hypotenuse. Tangent has opposite, but only sine has both of them. So, formula. Then put in your two numbers, the 5 and the 2.5. And we're going to plug in to get our answer, sine inverse, to get 30.0 degrees. Keep your decimal, and remember the units. You don't see it before this, but it is degrees anytime we use a sine inverse, cos inverse, or tan inverse. I haven't talked about it yet, but I want to go back to finding a ratio. Just like the tangent ratio, if you're asked to find sine 37, just type it into your calculator. Sine 37, always 4 decimal places. If you have something like this, you have the ratio already. You're trying to go backwards, we're going to use cos inverse. So second function cos, and then type in the number. And if you've done it properly, you should get 64.3 degrees. And a quick review of the algebra. Same thing, tangent, sine, cosine, it's all the same. The unknown is on top, so I'm going to bring this over and multiply. And you should get 5.1. This one right here, we're going to do the switch, and you should get 7.6. And the final one, we're finding the angle cos inverse this time, 62.2 degrees. Don't forget the degree sign. One thing I want to point out, and it's different with sine and cosine. The hypotenuse is always the longest side of a triangle. Now, if it's always the longest, the bottom number is always bigger. The ratio must be less than 1. You always have a small number divided by a bigger number. It will always be 0 point something.